games. It's ScrubGames. Drop a like, drop a sub, go ahead and subscribe to ScrubGames. Drop a like, drop a sub, go ahead and subscribe to ScrubGames.
How's it going, Scrub Gamers? Welcome back to another video here at ScrubGames, and today we have the next installment of our Understand How to Build series. That's where we go over all the leaders in a given set to help you understand how to build them to suit you and your playstyle. So we've covered all the ones that you get in the main set. Now we're going to go over the starter ones, or the spotlight deck leaders, and we're going to start off first with Boba Fett. So if you're interested in a new Boba Fett, then stay tuned, and also don't forget, you can always like, comment, and subscribe to keep updated with my videos as when they drop. And also, by clicking the notification bell, you can then get alerts when my videos do drop, so you can watch them there and then, or at a later time that suits you best. So, without further ado, let's get into the video and help you understand how to build Boba Fett. So, first thing I'm going to do is focus on the leader first, because Star Wars Unlimited is a leader-based game, so you can't really play without one. And the thing with a leader is that it's going to be what you build your deck around, because some leaders are very generic in that they have no focus on a specific kind of thing, whereas some of them have a specific focus on certain kind of things, like it could be for a trait, it could be on aspects, or because some way to play the game. Lucky for Boba Fett, he is very generic. Like, he doesn't have much of a focus on a given thing, outside of, with its effect on the leader area, being doing damage by non-combat. So, Boba Fett is in the aggression trait, so he's got the aggression and villainy traits, so that means black and red if you prefer the colours rather than names. And he comes down when he deploys at 6 or more resources. So it's not too early, but it's not too late. And he's got the brand new kind of deploy, which is where you can deploy him either as a ground unit, so like normal deploys we've had in the past, or featuring the new kind of deploy where you can put him as an upgrade on a friendly vehicle that doesn't have a pilot on it. Now, if you do deploy him as a ground unit, so as normal like most of the other leaders do, he comes down as a 4/7 with no effect. So just on 6 resources, which is as early as turn 5 or onwards, if you or earlier if you ramp, you then get to play him as a 4/7, just a basic 4/7 with no effect. But if you deploy him as an upgrade on a vehicle that has no pilot, he makes the attached unit a leader unit, so that unit you attach it to is now a leader, and he gets a when deployed effect, which is when deployed as an upgrade, you can deal up to 4 damage, divided as you choose among any number of units. So it's like a miniature Overon Barrage, which is really good, since that card is one of the best cards in the game. Having that on another card in like a smaller fashion is pretty good. Not only that, he also gives the unit that he attaches to extra buffs to its stats, giving extra 4 power and 4 health, so giving an extra 4/4 to that unit, and that's pretty good. So that's basically what the leader does when he deploys. He's got when deployed as an upgrade, but nothing when he's deployed as a ground unit. But when he's in the leader area, his focus is on non-combat damage. And that is, whenever you deal non-combat damage, that could be a damage by an effect, by a indirect damage, things like that. As long as it's not by a unit attacking into something, then you can exhaust the leader, and if you do, you deal 1 indirect damage to a player. Now, you can choose yourself or your opponent. It depends. Mainly you go choose your opponent, but there are some cases where you might choose yourself, but there's very niche situations like that. He also comes equipped with the Underworld and Bounty Hunter trait, as well as Pilot. Traits, and you get some good benefits from Underworld and Bounty Hunter in this game. Not so much Pilot, it's just more that to show that he is a pilot. And that's essentially a leader, so there's not much really to go over. He has an effect when in the leader area where if you focus on doing damage that's not through combat, you can trigger the effect to do an extra damage through indirect damage to your opponent. And then he deploys pretty well, and he's got those 2 options, and also has a nice effect. Well, he has an effect when you deploy him as an upgrade, but not when you deploy him as a normal unit. And also, he does have a showcase as well. That's one thing to note, is that all leaders since set 2 have a showcase. And all a showcase is an alternative art of the leader. So it's more shiny, better looking art, well, most of the time better looking art, that you can get to basically bling out your deck. Now, do remember that with showcases, they're just alternative arts, and art is always subjective. So if you feel like you like it, that's fair enough. If you feel like you don't like it, that's also fair enough, because when it comes to opinions and preferences, it comes down to yourself, because you're the one who's going to be playing the card, so the only opinion that matters is you if you go to play it. And that is the leader covered, so hopefully that's helped you understand the leader and kind of what he wants to do before we get into what the benefits are with everything else. Now, remember also, I do like to appeal to this this kind of series to all levels of players. It would be from absolute beginners to seasoned veterans. So there might be differing stuff. And for those brand new players, I'll make sure I include some basic information to go over to make sure that you've got everything you need to basically just start playing the game without to go across multiple videos. And I feel that if you're a veteran player, you might not want this. So what I've got down in the description below is some timestamps if you feel like you won't need any basic information because you're a veteran, you're amazing at the game. Then you can always go ahead and skip and use the the little timestamps in the description below to skip to where you want to go. But for the new players, we're going to go through a bit of basic information to help you out, so that way you've got everything you need to start playing. So, the first thing we're going to go over for a bit of basic information is bases. And that's because, like a leader, they are the everything you need to play the game, because the most important thing is they're going to determine how you win or lose a game. Because the only way to win a game in Star Wars Unlimited is to do enough damage to your opponent's base equal to the health on its base, or on that base. And as you can see from the top left corner of these bases here, as shown on screen, you've got the health total, being like this rare base 27 and this common base 30. Now there aren't differences in bases because there are rare bases and common bases, and we'll go over those now with it. And we'll start off with the rare bases because they have the most variation. So with rare bases, essentially what they are bases that have less health than normal, normal being 30 health, and to compensate for that, they also come with an effect. So essentially, you've got different types of effects, and they come with kind of themes in each set. So with 4 sets, we have had only 3 lots of rare bases because we didn't have any in set 2. So it meant for the first 2 sets of the game, we had the same bases from set 1. And set 1 bases, they are all focused on epic actions, just like a leader's deploy. It's an effect you can take once a game. Once it's used up, it's gone. And they all have the same health, being 25 health. And the epic actions range from, and they kind of fit in with what their aspect wants to do. Like how the blue one gives a shield, the green one gives ambush, the red one does damage to something that's damaged, and then the Jeddah City, being the yellow one, gives -4 power. So they all have a focus on their own aspect, and they also none of them affect the leader. Well, yeah, don't affect the leader directly, but maybe for outside ways. But yeah, they don't affect a leader directly. So this is the rare bases for set 1, and they kind of vary like how we had the Energy Conversion Lab being the green one, being the most popular for the first 2 sets, and now Tarkin Town's got to changed up where the meta's evolved to be the more popular one for the 3rd and 4th sets. And then we had some from set 3, and those ones were focused on, on leaders, because they had effects that either triggered when your leader deployed, or gave boosts to their stats when they were out on the board. Now, considering that they're focused on leaders, their main focus was for the Twin Suns format. Because in that format, you get 2 leaders rather than 1, so you get double the benefits. And given that their health is not really worth too much of their stats, like the stat increases are only 1, and the effects when they're deployed aren't the best, they don't see much play outside of niche combos with certain leaders, so you don't really see much play of them. That's why I haven't put in, because 1, they're not the most used or best bases, and 2, there's too many to fit into one kind of graphic where you can't really see them. And that brings us to the one we got for set 4, and the focus for this one is deck building size and also opening hand. Because you've got 2 that affect your opening hand, which is Nabat Village and Colossus being the blue and yellow one, with the blue one giving you 5 more health. So the first time in a set, we've had more health on a base than normal. And for that 5 health, you lose 1 card in hand. So you start off with 5 instead of 6. Now Nabat Village is the kind of opposite, where you have less health, so you have more cards, being that you open your hand with 3 more cards, so you get to look at 9 in your opening hand rather than 6, but you can't mulligan, which means overall you see less cards over 2 hands, because you normally start with 6, and you can mulligan into a never 6, so you see 12 overall, but in 2 lots. Whereas in Bat Village takes away an extra, 25% of the cards you could see, but gives you 50% more in your first opening hand, which means you can be more consistent with your opening hand to make sure you've got turn 1 play and things that you want to have, and even if you're playing a combo deck, you can get the combo pieces you need in more consistently than normal. But you don't get to keep the 3 cards, because at the start of your first action phase, you've got to put 3 of your cards in your hand, but to the bottom of your deck in order you choose. So you don't get to keep those 3 cards, that would be busted, but you do get to make your hand a bit more consistent, to make sure you're opening better and bricking a little bit less. And that brings us to one about deck building. Now that is Data Vault and Thermostat here, being green and red base, and they affect your your deck building size. So the green one is going to give you 3 more health, but at the cost of that extra 3 health, you got to have 10 more cards in your deck minimum. So instead of a 50 card minimum, you got to have a 60 card minimum. Now this is going to disrupt your consistency and make it a little bit less consistent. Whereas the red one does the opposite, where for 3 less health, you get 5 less cards in your deck, meaning now your minimum deck size goes from 50 to 45, make your deck a bit more consistent. Now, that's all the effects we have currently as set 4, but do remember that there are never type of base. If you feel like any of these bases aren't the best or something you don't want, then you can always go for a common base, or like they call it, vanilla bases. And that's because it's a term in TCGs, vanilla, meaning that it's like kind of plain, like how you like a vanilla cheesecake, just a plain cheesecake, and that's essentially what these bases are. They have no effect, they're not really, well, they have no effect, they're just very plain. And essentially, that's what common bases are. They're all 30 health bases, and they only differ in their name, location, art, and, aspect. That's the one. That's the one I remember. There's 4 things. And essentially, with these ones, since there's no benefit to having a certain name or location on your base, you essentially pick the aspect you want, and in that aspect, you pick your favorite art and play that one. Now, these 4 are my preferred arts, with the top ones being the new Hyperspace Foil ones. You can get the Game Gen X Twin Suns deck boxes, and that's pretty cool. First time we've got Hyperspace Foil of common bases. And the bottom ones are my preferred arts in the brand new set. So, that's what we got with the bases, and just make sure that you're picking the one you want, and you've got to think about if the rare effect is beneficial. And for Boba Fett, it depends on what aspect you're playing. So if you're playing blue, you could play Colossus to go for control, have more health, but then you can also go for 30 health base if you feel that one less card is gonna impact you and you kind of need it. For green, you can go for ECL or Entry Conversion Lab because that given ambush is a pretty nice effect for any class 6 or less. And or if you feel like you don't want that less health because the ambush is not going to be that beneficial, you can just go for a 30 health base, that'd be quite nice. Then for red, if you want to go double red, Tarkin Town's a pretty good one. It goes well with the whole damage focus for Boba. But if you feel like the health is not worth it, especially when you go in double aspect, you can always go for 31. And yellow, you're more likely going to want to go for the 30 health base because you can get more consistency with Nabat Village, but do you really want that? Like, there's not much you need for consistency where he's very generic, so you're not looking for certain combos, so you might want to go for 30 health base for yellow. So that's bases. Now let's check out the aspects. So the next thing we're going to do is go over the aspects. Now, in this game, there are 6 aspects, and you'll find them across almost all cards in the game. You'll find them on your leader, on your base, and the majority of cards you want to play. And with your leader, you get 2 aspects, being one of the 4 color ones plus one of the other 2, and then on your base, you'll get one of the color ones. Now, each aspect has a certain way to play, so we're going to go over each of them, so you can kind of see which one you prefer, because some people like a certain way of playing, and if you can figure out which one you is kind of suits your playstyle, that'd be maybe the way you go with Boba when you combine a base with him. So the first one we're going to go over is the blue one, and that is called Vigilance. So most people prefer it to one by color or by the actual name, so Vigilance is the blue one. Now this aspect plays defensively, giving you the ability to heal damage, remove dangerous units from play, and even protect your base from enemy attacks. So this aspect is perfect for players who like to play patiently, and also want to endure almost any assault your opponent throws at you. So if that sounds like something you prefer, Vigilance is a good one to go for. Next we have Command, and this is the ramp aspect, because this aspect allows you to accelerate your resources and call upon lots of units or strengthen the units you already have in play, and is the aspect of choice for players who like to overwhelm their opponent with a massive board presence. So if you like that sound of that, and also you like ramping resources, then green, or as it's also called Command, is the perfect one for you. Then we're going to go on to the next one, which Boba Fett has, and that is Aggression. And with this aspect, you can attack with maximum efficiency and dish out loads of damage. And it's a great fit for players who prefer fast-paced, fiery playstyles that can break through your opponent's defenses and hurl huge damage at them to achieve victory at all costs. So if that sounds like the perfect one for you, then luckily Boba has that, and you can even go with double aggression with the red base attached. So, as it suggests, it's very aggressive towards damage and also aggro too. That brings us to the last of the color ones, being Cunning, and now this aspect allows you to adapt to any situation on the fly with powerful, immediate effects, and has loads of tools for disrupting your opponent's game plans. So this aspect is a perfect fit for players who prefer quick responses to threats, and also have an answer for almost anything your opponent will throw at you. So if that sounds perfect to you, Cunning could be a great addition in a base to go with Boba. So those are the 4 main color aspects, and we have the other 2. So first one we have the other one that's on Boba, and that's Villainy. Now this aspect is about battling for ultimate power with cards that feature the antagonists of the Star Wars series. Now it's a perfect fit for players who want to command huge armies or wield powerful destructive effects, and it's very unique and is often paired with another aspect on a card. So it can be paired with one of the color aspects, like as you've seen on your leader, as well as on its own. So that's the other one you also gain with Boba. Next we have the last one, which is Heroism, which you won't have on Boba because this is the villainy side of him back during the original series. And this aspect is all about fighting for peace and justice with cards that feature the protagonists of the Star Wars series. Now this is a perfect fit for players who want their cards to support and protect each other while also pressing the attack, and similar to Villainy, is often paired with other aspects on a card. So those are the 6 aspects, so hopefully it's helped you understand them and kind of figure out which one you kind of like prefer, or which one that kind of messes well with how you like to play. And remember, with a leader and a base, you get access to 3 aspects, because you get 2 in your leader and 1 in your base, which means you get access to these 4 different combos if you want to go for them. So with a blue base, you get access to red-blue, with a green base, red-green. And if you go double red by adding a red base with Boba, you get double red, which gives you access to the double aspect cards, which we'll see soon. And then with a yellow base, you get access to red-yellow. Now those are the 4 different combos, and we will get into them, but first before we get into those, we need to finish off the aspects by understanding the aspect penalty. So, this is something that comes into the game, because when you go to play the game, you can put absolutely any card you want in your deck unless it's suspended. Currently there are only 4 suspended cards, and 2 of them are units and 2 of them are leaders, so Triple Dark Raid and DJ you cannot play in your deck, so do bear that in mind when you're building your deck, you can't put those in. But you can put any other card that's not suspended in your deck, but when it comes to playing the card, that's where the asset penalty comes in. Because essentially how it works is if you want to play a card, you pay the cost, but if any of the aspects do not match within your leader and or base, you then pay an extra 2 resources to cover that card's aspect doesn't match on top of its cost. So I like to improve on this series, so I like to put like a little graphic as well as explain it to kind of cover 2 of the few ways you can kind of learn. So you can see an example on screen now of the asset penalty when it would apply, when it wouldn't, using this leader base combo, which is Boba with a yellow base. So with this aspect combo of your leader and base, you get access to Villainy, black, Aggression, red, and Cunning, which is yellow. So you have access to these 3 aspects. So in the first box, the 0 additional cost. If you were to play a card where all the aspects on that card match on your leader and base, no additional cost, play it for its actual printed cost. Now for the second box, the 2 additional costs, this is where one aspect on the card doesn't match. So say for this aspect combo, if you want to play a card where one aspect doesn't match, say it's a 2-cost card, it now costs 4 because you've got to cover 2 extra resources to cover that aspect that doesn't match, which means a 2-cost now costs 4, and that's double the cost. Also do note that each aspect only provides 1 of itself, so you'll get 1 of each of the aspects on your leader and base. So if you were in this aspect combo to play a double red card, you got 1 red aspect to cover Boba, but because you don't have a second one to cover the other red aspect, you have to pay an extra 2 to cover it, so a card that's double red would cost an extra 2 because you don't have that second red aspect. Now for the last one, the 4 additional costs, this is where 2 aspects are on the card, and both of them don't match what's in your leader and or base, so you have to pay an extra 4, because remember it's 2 per, to cover that aspect's card cost. So essentially if it's a 2-cost card, you now have to play 6, and that's triple the cost of the card, so it's a lot bigger of a cost. So hopefully that helps you understand the asset penalty, but do remember that the asset penalty isn't always the worst thing that could possibly be. Sure, it makes a card more expensive, but sometimes it's worth it. Because sometimes you get cards where they're really good in terms of their effects, but they're out of aspect for your aspect combo with your your leader and base. So you might have to pay an additional cost, and the best example of that is the double aspect events from set 1. Now they are 4-cost events, double aspects, so double blue, double red, and things like that. But they have 4 effects, you can use any 2 of them to resolve how you choose. And they are so powerful that sometimes you don't want to play double aspect just to play them. Sometimes you play dual aspect and then play them still. So that means in dual aspect it costs an extra 2 because you only have one of the aspects, which means now they cost 6 instead of 4, but sometimes it's worth it just to play the card because they're just that good. So do bear in mind that while the asset penalty is making a card more expensive, sometimes it's worth it for what the card does. Now that's the aspects. Now the last thing we want to go over is ratios. So in Star Wars Unlimited you can play up to 3 copies of any given card. And that means you can either play a full playset of 3, you can play just 2, or you can play a sole 1 copy of a card. Now here we're going to go over and help you understand when you want to have a certain amount of copies of a card, and first off we're going to start with 3 copies. This is the ratio to help maximize the likelihood the desired card will be in your hand when needed, And examples are usually cards that you want to play on the first turn of the game, or cards you want to see multiples over the course of the game. So the perfect example we've got here is Resupply, because it's the easiest and cheapest ramp card, being a free cost ramp card, and it's an event that is neither in Heroism or Villainy, so you don't have to worry about being locked to one of those sides. It's just a green card you can play as early as turn 2 to ramp up your resources. So if you're playing green, you're normally playing ramp, and you normally want to play Resupply so you can ramp as soon as possible. Because then as soon as you hit turn 2, you can use this ramp up, so you go into your turn 3 with 5 resources instead of 4. So that means you can play more things or bigger things a little bit quicker than your opponent can. So this is a good example of when you want to have 3 copies of a card, and kind of example of the card description here. Next we have 2 copies of card, and this is an example with Rivals Full, because this is the ratio of cards that aren't great to draw early in the game, but you still want to go through multiple copies over the course of the game. And examples are usually boss cards or high costing cards. An example of a high costing card here is Rivals Full, because it's quite unique in that it is a removal event that can hit any unit. Because sometimes you get removal events that can't hit leaders, like say non-leader unit, so it means leaders are a little bit tougher to hit. But Rivals Full is perfect because it hits absolutely any leader, any unit, no matter what, even leaders, and it is high costing at 6 because it basically hits anything. So that means during the beginning of the game, in the early turns, you might not want to have this. So sometimes you'll resource it, which means then you lose access to it, or you keep it in your hand, which means then you've got less options in your hand because you're holding this one to use, so you can use it late in the game. But if you load the copies from maybe 3 to 2, you hopefully won't see it in the beginning of the game when you can't use it. But in a later game, when your opponent has the leader out and you want to take it out, you'll have it then to be able to use it. And that brings us to the last one, being the 1 copy of a card, and this is usually referred to as tech choices. So this is usually the ratio for cards that are added to counter a specific situation, and the best example I've got is Restock. Because this is usually added to a deck in order to help counter hard control decks, because what they'll do is focus on controlling the game, and that's it. So they're focused on just controlling the game, and since the only way you can win a game of Star Wars is by doing damage to a base equal to the health on the base, they won't be focused on damage, but they'll use deck out damage to win. And what deck out damage is essentially, if you go to draw a card but you can't, you take 3 damage per card you can't draw. So the resupplies phase, if you can't draw 1 card, that's 3 damage, and if you can't draw both cards, that is 6 damage. So hard control decks will focus on controlling the game, deck you out, and make that damage be the way they win the game. But you can use Restock to then put up to 4 cards in the discard pile on the bottom of the deck in random order, and you can even choose itself as one of the cards due to how the game works. So you can loop itself to make it so you didn't have a deck out, and that'll make it so hard control decks can't deck you out to do damage to you to win the game, and they have to find a different way to push that damage. So hopefully that's helped you understand the ratios. Now we're getting to the information you're probably looking for, and that is the aspect combos for Boba Fett. So, the first one we should look at is Boba Fett, because he's got 2 aspects. He's got aggression and he's got villainy. This means you get access to aggression and the aggression side of villainy. And that gives some good benefits, because remember, while Boba Fett is very generic, his only really focus, at all, is about doing damage that is not combat damage. You can trigger his effect to do an extra 1 by indirect damage. So you most likely want to have effects in your deck that have ways to deal damage that aren't by combat. And luckily, aggression has a huge focus on that, and since that's the aggression he's got, you can compare any aspect to it and leave aggression to do the damage by non-combat, while the other aspect does his thing to protect you in that other way. So with aggression, you've got many different ways. Like in the dark villainy side, you've then got some pretty nice cards. Like you've got Pride for your turn 1 play, and this allows you to, when on attack, if you have the initiative, deal 2 indirect damage to a player, and that and then trigger Boba. And then also like that, you've got some space units like Imperial Inceptor, IG at 2000, Roof of Fader, and they're all really good because they also trigger Boba by doing some non-combat damage, whereas Imperial Inceptor do 3 damage to a space unit. IG 2000 will just do, when played, 1 damage to up to 3 units. That's another way to trigger. And then Rufus Vader is really good because it's got effect triggers both when it's played and when it's defeated. And that is to deal 2 damage to a unit, enemy unit, and also enemy base. So you deal 4 damage overall, just 2 on a unit and then 2 on a base. And when it's defeated, it does that again. And this is perfect because you can also deploy this on your leader. You deploy your leader on this because it comes out the same turn as your leader can deploy. So it means if your opponent wants to take this out, which then you turn it from a 4-6 to an 8-10, if they want to take it out, which is because it's then going to hit hard, they didn't take the response of taking its when defeated to do some more damage to them. You also have other pilots like Vader here. Vader being nice when you put on a pilot, put on a space unit, and it gives it even more ways to kind of do damage because then it gives the unit on attack when they can deal 1 damage to a unit, and if that unit is defeated by that damage, you can then do another 1 damage to either a unit or a base. So there's another way you can kind of turn something that won't normally do damage into be able to do damage thanks to Vader, that then trigger Boba. And then you have Devastator. This is probably one of the strongest cards to go with Boba, because even though it's a high playing card at 8 resources, it comes down with whopping stats at 9/6, which is huge, very, very powerful, and gives you some more control over the damage, because usually with indirect damage, the person it's dealt to gets to choose where it goes. If you do it to your opponent, they can choose where it goes. I've put on a base or a unit, up to them. But when Devastator is down, it allows you to assign all indirect damage you do to an opponent. So instead of your opponent deciding, you get to decide now, so you have more control over it. And not only can it allow Boba then when you do non-combat damage to then choose where you put that 1 damage for Boba, but itself when it played does 4 indirect damage itself, meaning that with Boba, you'll do 4 indirect damage when you deploy Devastator, put it wherever you choose, and then Boba's 1 indirect damage, you get to choose where that goes as well, so you can do 5 damage to all at base to even finish off games. You also have different ways to play, do it as well for events, like Force Stroke being able to do 5 damage to a non-vehicle damage, or 5 damage to a non-vehicle, but they get to draw a card, whoever controls the unit, so if you do it to your opponent, they're going to draw a card, but you do 5 damage, and since it's not combat, it trigger Boba. You also have no disintegrations, which is a good one. It's better with the old Vader leader, but you can still do it with Boba, because essentially what it does is deals enough damage to a unit so it has 1 less HP. And since it's doing non-combat damage, it will then trigger Boba. Now they got to think about, do they do that 1 direct damage to that unit you just did damage to, which you then finish it off, or do they do it to their base? Now, if they've got 1 unit on the board, they've got to decide if they're going to lose that unit, or if they're going to essentially take it to base. And this could be a way, if they do choose the unit, where you can just take out a unit in one go, which is pretty cool. Now that's the villainy side of aggression. You also have cards in the non-villainy side of aggression. Like, not all the cards will do effects that trigger Boba, but some of them are not useful effects. Like, if you go for a space-focused version, then CaptainScrubsily is a nice one where it comes down on turn 2 to provide a 2/5 in the ground arena, but then we'll give all friendly vehicles an extra 1 power plus overwhelm, meaning you get some piercing damage as long as with extra power. You also have Cham Syndulla as a way to kind of respond to ramp, because usually ramp is located in the command aspect, but Cham offers you some ramp if you're behind on resources, which is really cool, and you get some good vehicles like Droid Missile Platform and War Juggernaut. Droid Missile Platform being a nice one where it's got strong power at 4, but if it's taken out, you get to do 3 indirect damage to your player, and since that's unpreventable damage, that will trigger Boba if taken out, so you've got to think about if they're taking 4 damage from it attacking, or if they take it out, they take 3 damage back and trigger Boba, so they take then 4 damage anyway, which is really cool. Then you have War Juggernaut, and this one comes out the turn Boba can deploy, so you can hand pop him on him to turn him from a 3/7, or even more because you can get more powerful, to at least a minimum a 7/11, which is cool. And he's got a nice, really cool effect triggers Boba, because when he's played, you get to do 1 damage to any number of units on the board. Now that trigger Boba, because that's once again not non-combat damage, and then Boba can then jump on him and basically do some more damage on top of that. And the nice thing about this is that the more things that are damaged on the board, the stronger you get. So even himself as well, the more things on board that are damaged, you get an extra 1 power per. So if 5 things are damaged, you get an extra 5 power, which could be absolutely huge. Then you also have events that do damage. You have Darren Raid as a way to just for 1 to do 2 damage to a base or unit, way to trigger Boba. You have Shoot Down as well, that can also trigger Boba by doing 3 damage to a space unit. And if you defeat that unit by this, you get to do 2 damage to a base, that's then more indirect damage. And since you've taken out a unit, you've potentially push that damage to all the base, because think about it, if your opponent does turn 1 plays a space unit has 3 or less power, you shoot down, you take that unit out by doing 3 damage to it, and because you took it out for this, you do 2 damage to their base, then Boba will trigger and do 1 more indirect damage, as if they got no units that go to their base as well. It's pretty nice. You also have Open Fire as a way to do 4 damage to a unit, once again triggers Boba, and then you have Planetary Bombardment being a huge one, because this is one that for 6 allows you to do 8 indirect damage to a player, so that'd be 9 with Boba, because you get that, because it's indirect damage that can't be prevented, will happen, trigger, and then Boba will do an extra 1, so that's 9 with Boba. But if you have a capital ship, which you, capital ship, not ship, then you have like Devastator or even Ruthless Raider, this would do 12 damage instead, so it could be 13 with Boba. And the nice thing is if you put it with Devastator on board, Devastator allows you to control where the indirect damage goes, so you can put all 12, or technically 13 thanks to Boba, to your opponent's base, or however you choose with it. So it could be like with Devastator, it's like a guaranteed like 12 or 13 damage over 1 barrage, which is huge. So that's just the things you get from Boba himself in aggression. Now we're going to go and check out some of the other aspects when you combine a base with Boba. So first thing we're going to do is double aspect, because this is one where you kind of limit the amount of cards you have, because while you get access to these 10 double aspect cards, you lose access to a whole other aspects by going double red. So instead of getting blue and red cards, you just get the red cards and double red, and it's only 10 cards, so you got to think about, is it beneficial to have just these 10 cards instead of a whole other aspect? Now, some leaders do get a good benefit with the double aspect cards because some of them are very powerful and make good use of it, but not all do. Every leader now has access to do this, whereas instead when you only had like one leader in each. But now with more cards, we have more access to, well, every leader having a chance at it. Now, some of these cards do pretty well with Boba, and there's not many that do. So out of these, probably the best ones you're going to have are Aggression, Twice the Pride, and Chaos of War being the better ones that can kind of not just trigger Boba, but be useful. Because Aggression is a really nice one, and that gives you 4 options, just like all the other double aspect cards of the same kind in the events. And one of those is doing damage. That's going to trigger Boba, and then you get some other ones like drawing a card, taking off upgrades, or restanding things that have 3 or less power. Very good, triggers Boba, and also does something else. Then you have Twice the Pride, which is pretty good, which can give a huge boost to a unit by giving it extra 4 power for a cost of 2, but you have to do 2 damage to it when you attach it. But the nice thing about doing that damage to it is then you get to trigger Boba because you have done some non-combat damage. That's a pretty good way to boost up a unit and do 1 indirect damage to your opponent. And then you have Chaos of War, which is a free cost event that allows you to deal damage to either player to the base equal to the number of cards in hand. Now, the bad thing is about this is it's going to hit you as well, depending on how many cards you have in hand. But if your opponent has a lot of cards in hand, it could do a lot. But if they got very few, you're not going to do too much. But then again, it's another way to trigger damage off Boba. Now, the only other thing that kind of really triggered Boba well, that could actually be useful, is Saul. But the thing is, he just puts attacks on your opponent where they got to take 2 damage to their base in order to play events. Now, the thing is that not every deck plays events or plays many or too many events. So it's not often you get a good use out of this, and even then with its stats, it's normally going to be taken out before it even does more than even gets to do 2 damage. So double aggression could be a good way to play Boba, but you're not really getting much benefit because you're getting only Aggression, Twice the Pride, and Chaos of War that are going beneficial there. But luckily, in Aggression itself, which Boba has access to, you got enough ways to kind of trigger that, so you can leave like these few cards that kind of help out. So you can always try it out, but it won't be the strongest of the aspects. Next, we have the Vigilance option. So remember, Vigilance is a more defensive one where it gives you the options to heal, remove threats on board, and even defend yourself with like things like shielding or Sentinels. So you can play more of a control way with Boba, which can be pretty good because red-blue make for a very nice way of control in the dark side. Now you got 2 cards here, ones I could find that can also trigger Boba being in blue, and that is Death Trooper and also Dr. Pershing. Because Death Trooper, when it comes down, does 2 damage to a friendly unit and then 2 damage to your opponent's enemy ground unit. So that's a way to trigger Boba. And even Pershing as well, not only control you cards, but also trigger Boba as well, because its action is to tap himself and deal damage to a friendly unit to draw a card. And that 1 damage will then trigger Boba to be able to do a damage to your opponent. So you're doing damage to yourself to draw a card, and then damage to your opponent, and the damage to your opponent is indirect, so it won't be stopped. So those are the few things you can have that are in blue that kind of trigger Boba. Now, other ways you can do to play like controlling is like the Client, often a nice way to heal. Item Versal is a good kind of unit to come down. It comes shielded either if it comes down as a ground unit or as a pilot on a space or on a vehicle. And you even have Maleficence as a kind of pretty cool unit you can get Boba to deploy on. Because even though it's a 9 cost 7/7, it does offer heal, but you can play it cheaper because of Exploit. So that basically means that you can defeat a certain amount, well, up to 4 units to make it cheaper. So you can get this out the turn before Boba deploys by paying on 5 resources, by killing 2 units you have on board to make it a 5 cost to come down. Then comes down to 7/7 and makes something a little bit weaker and not able to attack. And in the turn after, you can then deploy Boba on it, make it an 11/11, and then put 4 damage across the board, and then start swinging with 11 damage for it and healing 2 off your base. So pretty cool way you can try out. Not maybe the best, but a pretty cool thing, I thought. And then you got the more controlling things like Avengers, a big late game space unit that comes down and forces your opponent to defeat one of the units every time it's played or attacks. And then you have removal events like Paradox being like a miniature Avenger in a cheaper form, but a one-time use. And No Glory only results allowing you to take control of your opponent's unit and then defeat it. So if he's got any when defeated, you get to trigger them. So this makes for a very good control play, and the best cards really in Vigilance are well, best units at least, are in the dark side. Because if you go to the non-dark side here, you've not got many good units you want to play. Like Survivor's Gauntlet's a pretty cool one because you can move Boba around from different vehicles, so you can have it on a Never vehicle, attack with it with Boba equipped, and then play or attack with the Survivor's Gauntlet, then move Boba off that into itself or a Never unit, so you can move Boba around, protect it when a unit's almost that is on is almost close to being defeated, or to push more damage thanks to it being on the Never unit and can attack with it. You also got some pretty good upgrades like Top Target, Entrench, and Paris Vision, which offer you good ways of control. Top Target gets you that healing in and survive longer. Entrench comes down as a pretty good way to either boost up your unit so it can help deal with your opponent's board, or put on your opponent's unit to stop them attacking your base as long as you've got nothing. But then they can attack if they got something in that arena. But if you have nothing in that arena and you put the Entrench on your opponent's unit, they can't attack at all. A nice way to kind of hold off things. And then you got Perilous Position as a nice way to kind of disrupt as well, because it rests whatever you put on, which is cool, and even minus the stats to make them a little bit weaker so they're less of a threat. Now, also you have a plethora of removal events, because you've got things like Takedown, Follow Dragon, Direct Hit, and Rival's Fall. It's like nice removal events which offer varying kind of removals. Like Takedown hits anything with 5 or less health, pretty good, can even hit leaders. Follow Dragon hits anything that's not a leader with 5 or more power, so there's big, stronger things. Direct Hit takes out any non-leader vehicles. Any vehicle doesn't have is not a leader. And then Rival's Fall hits absolutely anything, which is pretty cool. So you got a nice bit of control in there. So if you like control, Vigilance is a good way to pair with Boba Fett. Next we have Command, and Command offers you that ramp and a way to overwhelm your opponent. Because then you can increase your resource, drop bigger things quicker, and then make your opponent have a harder time of kind of dealing with you when you've got these huge things out where they're getting out like smaller things. And you've got good ways to do this, like you've got Crumb and Super Laser Technician as good ways to begin the game off. Like Crumb offers you a good bit of healing, and also ways to trigger Boba as well, because you can, when he's active, you can tap him and return him back to your hand to do a damage to a ground unit, and that is non-combat damage that I then trigger Boba. You also have Super Laser Technician as well, which is a pretty good ramp, and also is a reason maybe sometimes you might want to do that indirect damage to yourself. Because remember, when you do indirect damage, you do damage to that unit, to our opponent, and they choose where it goes. So if you do it to yourself, you get to choose where it goes, and since Super Laser Technician has 1 health, you can put that 1 indirect damage on your Super Laser Technician to make sure it does die, so you can get that ramp, which is cool. And when you get to the biggest turns, you also get things like Darth Vader and Maul being very good units, both ambush so they can attack the same turn they're played, and offers great things like Darth Vader increases more things aboard by getting out up to potentially 10 cost worth of cards for 7, whereas Maul hits really, really hard, but can have something else hit the damage if it's an Underworld card. So a nice way to keep it safe so it's then healthy to attack again and survive longer. Then for some space units, you've got things like Victor Leader, pretty cool, which once on board gives all your ever friendly space units an extra 1/1 power, so you can even pop Boba Fett on top of that when you can eventually deploy him, to make sure it's even stronger, survives longer, to get the full benefit of making all your ever space units stronger. Or even Devastator is a good later game one, where it comes down, dominates the space arena by being a huge 10/10 Sentinel, has Overwhelm so it pierces through any unit it attacks into, and also when it comes down it deals damage to an opponent's unit equal to the resource you have, so that's going to be a minimum of 10 damage going to take out something, so it's easily going to remove something on forward. Then you have some powerful events like Overwhelm Barrage and Palpatine's Return. Overwhelm and Barrage is just more of a stronger version of his when deployed as an upgrade, because it gives the unit an extra 2/2 boost, like how Boba does to himself when he deploys as a vehicle. But then you get to do damage to your opponent, well, damage to the board equal to the now power of that unit, so an extra 2 power on top of whatever its power is across the board, however you choose. You can make it even more stronger than Boba Fett's when deployed, or even a little bit weaker depending on what you choose. And then Palpatine's Return allows you to bring back any unit from your discard pile as long as you pay the cost. So it costs 6 itself, but it plays the card out 6 costs less. So as long as you pay more resources, you can have something that costs more than 6. And if it's a Force unit you play, reduced by 8, meaning you can play out Vader and Maul from your discard pile for just 6, or bring out almost anything as long as you pay the resources for it. So that's pretty cool there. And in a normal Cypher Command, you haven't got too much, but you still have some pretty good cards. Like you have Hugh Yang, because sometimes Star Viper is pretty good earlier turns. Like Hugh Yang's pretty nice in that it doesn't help trigger Boba, but it does boost up the power of a friendly unit. So it does it without putting things on that can be potentially knocked off with many of the kind of like upgrade hate kind of cards we've got. But it gives a boost to a unit, and if you play out Hugh Yang and have a space unit you can buff up, you now have a unit in each arena, And Hu Yang's there, which isn't doing much, but then it's powering up the space unit. Now you got to think about, did they take out this new space unit that's now buffed up, or did they take out Hu Yang? But they can't do it in one arena, you have to do it in separate arenas. You also have Consortium Star Viper, which is pretty good, hasn't seen much play, but it's a solid free cost free that when you have the initiative, it gives you Restore 2, you could heal to keep yourself in the game. And you got some bigger vehicles like Resupply Carrier being extra ramp, being when it played, you can ramp the top card of your deck. And Reinforcement Walker being a huge ground vehicle, which is pretty cool, and not often you see those. It's a 6/9, huge, like a good bit of power and huge bulk, and gets some nice benefits when it's played and when it attacks, because it either heals you by looking at the top card of your deck and discarding it, or it allows you to just draw that card and keep it in your hand. So it gives you either more cards or some healing, depending on what you want. You also have some good cards as well that aren't each unit, so you have some good ramp, in like Price on Your Head being a nice upgrade you can use the ramp, or resupply as we've seen before. Now you also have some other events that are pretty good, like Dogfight and Eject. Dogfight allowing you to attack with a unit even if it's rested, but it can attack bases. You can get more attacks, like more than one attack out of the same unit, which is pretty cool. And you have Eject, which does have some good shenanigans. Because remember we saw the Vader unit in the for the normal side aggression, what Boba offers. That's an upgrade or a pilot you can play out on turn 2. So you can play a space unit turn 1, then pilot Boba on at turn 2, and then you can get some shenanigans with Eject. Because after you swung with the Vader piloted unit, you can then use Eject and then knock off Vader from that unit into the ground arena and draw a card. So not only do you draw a card, but you take Vader off that unit, which is only given a 3/3 boost. And now in the ground arena, you have a 6-cost 7/7 on turn 3, which is very, very strong. Because then your opponent's going to have a harder time to deal with it, and it's comes out so early, like at least 2 turns earlier than you can normally drop it. So that is command, so if you like to ramp up and overwhelm your opponent, this could be a very good way to play Boba. Then lastly we have Cunning, and this offers some pretty nice effects that can also trigger Boba, but also remember it has an answer for almost anything and kind of a jack of all trades kind of aspect. So you got some good ways to trigger Boba, and you got like IBS Agent, Zagurian Starhopper, Elite P38, and even Boss's way to trigger them, which is cool. And like ISB Agent, just when played, you can play as early as turn 1, just comes down. If you show an event you got in your hand, you can then deal 1 damage to a unit, which then trigger Boba to do 1 indirect damage. You now have Sigurian Stopper, which doesn't really do anything straight away, but when it's defeated, you do 2 indirect damage to your opponent, which then once again will trigger Boba. And you have P38, which also triggers Boba by when it's played, or even when it's defeated, does 1 damage to a unit, so you get immediately to trigger Boba, rather than waiting for something to happen. And then Bosk is a really good one, because it's a unit you can bring out the ambush, and once on board, anytime you play an event, which Cunning has a lot of, you can then do 2 damage to a unit. And this pairs very, very nice with that event we saw before, which was Notice Integrations. Because while Bosk is on board, you can play Notice Integrations, which allows you to deal damage to a unit until it has 1 HP left. And then since you played an event, Bosk will then go ahead and do 2 damage to a unit, which can do 2 damage to that unit you just used it on, to then take it out. So that turns Notice Integrations into an insta-kill card. Really cool there. Then you have some bigger units, so you have Boba Fett himself, which then also can trigger your leader's kind of effect of doing direct damage if you deploy it as a pilot, because then when you deploy it as an upgrade, you can deal damage to a unit, and if it's a transport unit you put on, you deal 2 damage instead. So it's a nice way to trigger Boba, or you can just play it as a ground unit that's shielded. You then have Fett's Fire Spray, which is a really good space unit to play down on the turn Boba can deploy on 6 resources, because while you control a Boba Fett or Jango Fett, so either a leader or in the ground unit, you get to ready it. So you get to play out Fett's Fire Spray, ready it, then deploy Boba on it to turn it from a 5/6 into a 9/10. Deal 4 damage across the board how you like, and then swing for 9 damage straight away. So that can be a nice way to finish off games and push for a lot of damage, and then your opponent's got to deal with a 9/10 that's a leader. That's cool there. You also got Cad Bane as a very high costing event. Well, not event, sorry, a unit. Because it's a 7-cost 7/7, which can then capture up to a certain amount of number of your opponent's cards. And whenever it attacks, it can give one of those cards back. But if the opponent does take a card back, you get to draw 2 cards. So you got to think about, do they get that card back, or do they give you 2 cards, or they not do it and hope to take out Cad Bane a different way, but it's still going to take 7 damage. And then you have things like No Good to Be Dead as a nice kind of way to lock things down, to put things down for 2 turns, because of how the game works, which is cool. But remember, there's also the normal side of Cunning as well, so you got some pretty nice things there. Like you got some pretty good units like Greedo, Crafty Smuggler, Guerrilla Soldier, and Rampart 7. Well, Rampart 7, no, Radiant 7, sorry. So green is a pretty nice one. Early unit that can also trigger Boba by when it's defeated, where you can discard the top target on your deck, and then you deal 2 damage if it's not a unit. So if you hit a upgrade or an event, you do 2 damage, and then 2 damage to your opponent, and then one of your opponent's units at least, and then you will then go Boba effect to go and deal 1 direct damage. You have Crafty Smuggler, which while it won't trigger Boba, it still is a good unit to turn you play out. You can play it as early as turn 1. Comes out 2/2, but it comes shielded, so it's protected from damage once while it's got a shield. And then you have Gorilla Soldier, which you can play as early as turn 2. And this is when it can trigger Boba and get a good amount of benefit, because when it comes down, you deal 3 direct damage to your opponent, and if any of that damage you deal for that effect hits your opponent's base in any way, you get to restand itself. So on turn 2, not only are you doing 3 damage by this, you're also doing 1 indirect by Boba, because it's going to trigger it, because remember, indirect damage is non-combat damage that can't be stopped. So it's always going to trigger Boba, so you're going to do essentially 4 damage with Boba, and then if any of that damage from Gorilla Soldier hits your opponent's base, you get to restand him, so you can then attack the same turn, because he'll be ready to attack. And then you have Radiant 7, and this is another way to trigger Boba, because it also has a 1 play to do 1 direct damage. It deals 5 indirect damage. So with Boba, that's going to be 6. And what's on the board? All enemy non-leader units get -1 power for every damage on it. So the more damage that's on a unit, the weaker it is, as long as it's not a leader, which is pretty cool. And then, like I said, Cunning has a lot of events. You got some pretty nice ones like McClunky, able to make use of some of those Underworld cards, but bounce them back to your hand and deal 3 damage to a unit. Now, it's non-combat damage, so you trigger Boba. And you also got other ways to kind of push damage, but through combat by battle tricks. And that's with like things like Surprise Strike, where you can attack with a unit and give it 3 more power for that attack, so that it hits a little bit harder. You also have some other ways to deal damage for like Torpedo Barrage, which is a 3-cost event that deals 5 indirect damage to a player. So with Boba, that's once again non-combat damage, so you'll deal that trigger Boba as well. So that's then 6, which is cool. And you got things like Waylay as a way to disrupt your opponent by getting things off the board, not permanently, but get off the board nonetheless at a very cheap cost. So that's Cunning, and this is a good way to kind of play Boba, because it's got effects that are not just in aggression, but in its own way to kind of trigger Boba as well without needing too many cards in aggression to do this thing for you. Also, do remember, like we said, Villainy cards are not just equipped onto other cards with the other aspects, but on cards themselves. And you got some pretty nice ones you can trigger with Boba. You got things like TIE Bomber being a nice one that you can play turn 1. And this one, just when it attacks, deals 3 indirect damage to your opponent. So while it isn't hitting for any damage itself, it's still pushing 4 indirect damage thanks to its own effect, which then will trigger Boba for that 4. You can also, it's a nice one because you can also play it at turn 1, then pilot the Vader lead on it to make it even stronger, turn it from turn 2 when it can actually attack, into a 3/7, and then you're swinging 3 damage because of its effect, because its power now is boosted by Vader to be a 3/7, so swinging for 3. Throwing in 3 indirect damage will trigger Boba to do 1 more indirect damage, and then Vader's effect while attacking will do a damage to your opponent's unit as well. So you can get a lot of damage by that combination with Vader, which is cool. And now if you do something on your first turn to then deal damage, and then trigger the effects to do indirect damage, and any of that damage is put on your opponent's unit, you can play turn 2 onwards, TIE Dagger Vanguard, which when played deals 2 damage to a damaged unit. So if one of the units is damaged from the turn before, you can then use this to damage it more, and that'll trigger Boba to do more damage as well. Then you have Fett's Ever Fire Spray card, and that is the 4-cost 1 being Fett's Fire Spray, 4-cost 4/4, which when played or when it attacks, does 1 indirect damage to your opponent to trigger Boba. But if you control Boba as a leader or unit or upgrade, then it can deal 2 indirect damage instead. So with Boba, it's always going to do 2 indirect damage, which means every turn it's going to either be played or attack, and do 3 indirect damage with itself and Boba. Now, if you do play control as well, there is Merciless Contest, which is like a second copy of Paradox Side, in that it forces your opponent to use a card. But there's a little bit of difference in it because it's not going to be exactly the same. Because with this one, it makes each player, so both you and your opponent, defeat your non-leader unit control, which could be a downside or a plus, because if you control no units, you don't have to defeat anything. But if your opponent does, they will have to defeat something. But you can always use this as a way to defeat your own units that maybe have a when defeated, deal indirect damage kind of effect to trigger those. And it also hits non-leader units. So if you only got your leader out and your opponent's got units out that aren't their leader, you can trigger this. You have to defeat yours because your only unit is a leader, while your opponent will have to use one of theirs, which is cool. So you've got nice ways to play add this with control, and these is not all the cards you can play in Villainy that are pretty good, but just a good selection I thought I'd pick out. And then lastly, we have my preferred aspects, because this is something that I didn't have in the first 2 sets of this series, but I kept getting asked about this, so I thought I'd put it in from set 3 onwards. So I decided to put it in, so just in case you are unsure if you want to play a certain kind of way, you're still unsure how you want to play the unit, or the leader, I've put in what my preferred aspects be, maybe have a bit of help if you're still needing it. So the 2 ways I would play Boba is I would play mainly probably Command, because I just love some of the cards in there, like Overwhelm Barrage is so powerful. You get as a version of it on Boba when he deploys, but you also got Overwhelm Barrage being one of the best cards in the game. You get Ramp as well to be able to ramp up and play out bigger things quicker, which is really cool. And also Red-Green make a good combination in Villainy as well. And not only that, you do have the cool little combo with Eject and put Invader on a unit, like playing a turn 1 vehicle, and then put Invader on it turn 2, and then ejecting it off turn 3 to then play it on the ground arena, have Vader out 2 turns earlier, which your opponent has to deal with, which could be quite tough. So that kind of cool combo is what I kind of like about it. But if I wasn't playing that, I would mainly play yellow, because even though with yellow you lost Triple Dark Raid, still that didn't really impact the deck too badly. It did hurt, but it didn't take away from everything the combo has to offer. Because you still have cool things like Guerrilla Soldier is a good turn 2 play to trigger Boba and also do a fair bit of damage. You also have Bosk is a very strong card. You even have Fett's Fire Spray is a good way to come maybe finish off the game through putting Boba on and be able to attack straight away for 9 damage, which is powerful. So that's my preferred aspects, and that is the end of the video. So hopefully that's helped you understand how to build the new Boba Fett, and how to build it to suit you and your playstyle in all the different ways you can. So we got one more leader to go to cover the full set, and that's going to be Han Solo, which will come out tomorrow. So stay tuned for that, and also don't forget, you can like, comment, and subscribe to help us get to our 2,000 sub goal, because we are currently just under 200 away from it. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.